One of these two shots took only a few minutes to render out of Blender. That seems impossible? Well, it's not. I'll give you a hint. One of them is using VDBs in Blender. The other one is just using images. This video will be showcasing a workflow using an external software, EmberGen, and Blender. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is track my footage. I like to use CG Matter's Camera Tracker add-on for this one. However, this isn't a requirement. You can use Blender's built-in camera tracking tools. Okay, I now have my tracked scene. Let's see if my arm coming into the shot messed up the track. Okay, looks like there weren't any big issues from that. On the day, I also scanned the campfire itself so that I would have a nice 3D model for the interactive lighting of our simulation. Believe it or not, one of the trickiest parts of this process is actually going through and trying to line up the camera track with the photo scan. Okay, with that, we are looking pretty good on getting that photo scan lined up with our tracked footage. I'm going to go ahead and actually decimate the geometry of the photo scan a little bit. We don't need it to be quite as detailed as it is. Okay, now we need to take the animated camera that we have here and actually export it so that we can use it inside of EmberGen. And then we will also be exporting the campfire 3D model. Okay, now that I have my EmberGen file loaded up here, I'm going to import that camera and the ground plane into EmberGen. As you can see, that camera actually is imported into the scene, but we are very, very close to the simulation. One way to fix this is to actually just change the overall scale of our import. We can go ahead and go in and set this to something like 300% scale, and then our camera will be at a better scale for what we're looking at here. We will now go ahead and import the collider, which will be our ground object FBX. And then let's set that scale to 300% as well. Looking at this footage now, I think it would probably be more appropriate to set both of them to be 200%, and then we can go in and adjust other sizes later on. Okay, that's looking about right, and now let's go ahead and get our simulation up and going. First of all, I have my explosion going off right at the beginning, but I actually want the explosion of flame to happen once the dust hits the campfire. Looking back at my Blender file, we can see that this explosion should be happening at around frame 125. Now, I've had a ton of difficulty trying to get this to work when I export an image sequence at a certain frame rate. But after doing some testing, I finally figured out how to do it, and it literally is as simple as making sure that the frame rate of your camera is still just simply set to 60 FPS whenever you import it. The export of the image sequence will just happen at that speed, I guess. I still don't understand it entirely, but just keep it at 60, and then in the compositing stage, the frame rate will just work out. So don't adjust any values there. That should be totally fine how it is. Alrighty, looks like we have a simulation now that I'm pretty happy with. Let's see how that goes. Cool, that's looking good to me. Now, let's go ahead and make sure that when we actually export this, we get some nice up-res detail. So let's up-res that one time. If we tried to up-res it 3 times, well, it could work. Let's see if it doesn't crash our scene here. Okay, it's definitely going. And since we haven't crashed yet, we should be able to export with this triple quality. So I think we're gonna go ahead and export at that quality. Now for export, we just wanna make sure that that's going to the place that we want. I have this image sequence folder that prepared on my desktop, and then we can name that whatever. I'm just going to say Flu Flames. As far as file type, the most versatile file type would be the EXR format, and then go to multi-layer. Then you can go ahead and add all of the different layers that you want to be included in this image sequence. That could include the shadow shapes, so the actual shadows being cast onto our collider geometry here, and that can also include like the lighting from the fire itself onto that. So you can include those things. You can do the emission so that you can control the actual emission and power of the fire itself. For this example, we are simply going to do the shadow shapes and the scattering shapes. Both of these should now be rendering out inside of that same image sequence as just another pass in Blender that we can tweak with, which will include, of course, the shadows and the scattering light. Make sure that your resolution is set to what you want it to be, and then go ahead and just click Export Now. Okay, we can see that that export came out looking awesome. We have the shadow shapes, the complete render, and the scattering shapes with the lights. One thing to keep in mind with scattering shapes is that for whatever reason, the render of that light only exists within the domain of the simulation for some reason. So that can cause issues if you need to actually make a larger domain. That will make the export last longer, and depending on your computer, this could actually make it so that you might not be able to render it out. So you might have to lower the quality of the image sequence export to make this happen. But for this should work okay. In our Blender Compositor, we're going to do a really quick, simple setup just to see if this is working. We just take our movie clip, import that, and then we're going to be using an alpha over node to composite this on top. And then a scale node helps if you rendered it out at a different resolution quality and you want it to fit the render size. So let's go ahead and take this image sequence and import our actual final image sequence export. Hit A to select all of the frames and open image. We can now take that render all, plug it in here, and let's see if that's working properly. Okay, so we can see that that is rendering on top of it and it's looking pretty good. Obviously we have this weird thing where we get this sort of pixelated look when it starts. The best I can tell is when you do the upscale process, it doesn't work super well with a bunch of individual particles, but then of course we get the higher quality once the simulation continues on. A few things to keep in mind is we want to make sure that the alpha is not set to pre-multiplied or straight, but that it's set to channel packed. This should make sure that the alpha is actually working properly so we don't get some of the weird artifacting we get from other things. It looks like with EXR, it's not making too big of a deal. If you do it with a PNG sequence, you will need to make sure that that is working properly. Now that that's working here, we can start to composite the rest of our elements on top of this as well and get that going how we want it to. As you can see, we have these two separate channels here. We have the scattering shapes and the shadow shapes. Both of these need to be composited on top of that baseline footage, but underneath the render all footage. As a quick side note, I have this little add-on that I created for myself using an LLM. I believe I was using Claude for it, where I just hit quick shadow catcher setup, and it sets up a shadow catcher node setup here for me that allows for me to just tweak from the render settings. In this scenario, I don't think we actually need it as much, but it has been a good time saver for me to set up shadow catcher rendering when I am on a time crunch. As for right now, let's multiply the scattering shapes and the shadow shapes onto our base footage. We can move these out of the way a little bit. If we take a look at what the scattering shapes pass is, it actually is light on black. So instead of multiplying that on top, add or screen should have the same effect. You can see that the effect is pretty subtle. We actually probably want more light hitting there. So we can try multiplying the output of the scattering shapes a little bit here, not with color mix multiply, but with math multiply. Let's do a math node, multiply, and let's increase that a little bit. Okay, that is changing the color of our scattering here. If we want, we can go ahead and use a color ramp and change that back to a green value. Now you don't want perfectly green, something like that should work. Okay, that is way too bright. Let's bring that value way farther down, which should also help a bit with the realism. As you can see, we have a bit of a mismatch with the 3D models itself and the actual underlying footage. That's something that you could dial in a little bit more if you were willing to go ahead and do that, but for the sake of this, we'll just ignore that. Okay, now we have our light being cast onto the rocks themselves, and that's looking good. In this scenario, there isn't very hard directional lighting from any side. I actually turned the directional lighting in EmberGen essentially all the way off, but let's go ahead and add it on there just so we can see how that looks too. If you want to take your shadow shapes and plug that into the viewing node, you can see that it's really, really subtle. But essentially, when you're working with shadows, you just need to multiply the black values on top of the underlying footage. The same way we did it here, except instead of screen, we're going to use multiply. So let's take that, set this to multiply, shadow shapes, and let's multiply that from the result here. And then go ahead and plug that into the background. Now we should be seeing some of those shadows in the footage. Again, this is going to be a very subtle effect with not very intense directional lighting. So in this scenario, it doesn't matter too much. Now with that all put together, we're totally free to just render this out as one video clip or image sequence, however you like, and it's good to go. Of course, you can apply whatever color grading you want on top of all of this, and it should work just fine. Again, this is just personal preference. You don't need this, but I bought the Colorist Pro add-on, and so sometimes I like to just turn this whole output into a group really quick, and then I copy it, enable Colorist Pro, and then I use that as my input. So I just go ahead and paste that here, plug it into all these values, and then I can color grade this however I like. I just like working in ACES. I think it looks a little bit nicer, and that will actually help us be able to dial our result a little bit better. As you can see, the smoke here is actually probably too lit up. If I were to go and fix this, I would probably go in EmberGen and re-export this image sequence, dialing back that light value from the ambient lighting, and then maybe adding just a little bit of directional light. You can see here, there's a slight directional lighting coming from the right here. And actually, I'm gonna go ahead and export that image sequence again with some of those adjustments now that we've kind of seen this put all together. Quick side note as well, really quick, before I go in and add the shadows on top of there, I realized that I had the simulation, the image sequence in the wrong color space. With EXR sequences, I believe you want that to be set to sRGB, and that will more closely mimic the export output that we had from EmberGen. So just a quick tip there. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.